any given time, there cannot be more than 50% of the school at the school. If in fact it is a big school that cannot social distance other than by reducing the number of learners. It further stipulates that in section 10.1 that we need to social distance by at least 1.5 meters. Now, it's not 1.5 meters between desks, it's 1.5 meters between the children, which is a little different. Then, of course, it also says that you ought to try to ensure that insofar as possible, we don't have any overcrowding happening. Now, some schools were built in the 1900s, in the beginning of the 1900s, and some in the 2000s. And depending on when a school was built, your classrooms may be of varying sizes. But consider the people that NAPTOSA represents. We have people who are in combined schools, where not only are they bringing in grade R, 1, 2, 3, and 6, plus having the grade 7s, they're also bringing in grade 11 and grade 10 and having grade 12s, all in one school. And can you imagine that nightmare? So having sketched a bit of the background, NAPTOSA represents people from all walks of life in the education system. We have schools that could be called sophisticated and well-resourced, and we have schools that are very under-resourced and where the structure is hardly standing. But all those schools need to function, irrespective of where you are at. So today we have put together a team of people. At first we have Landeka Diamond from the Western Cape. I will introduce her to you in a second. And then we have Galen Bowles from Gauteng, whom I will also introduce. They are our two presenters on the timetable. But then we have Dr. Marion Joseph. And Dr. Joseph is the person in the Gauteng office and nationally who heads up all our work that has to do with curriculum and assessment. And we can't talk about the timetable without making reference to assessment. Then, of course, we have David Miller and Therona Mudley. David and Therona are PCOs in well, David is in the Western Cape and Therona is in KZN. In the background, we have Rishal, who's controlling everything for us and seeing that this entire gathering flows smoothly. Now, without further ado, let me just tell you about one or two of the background things. You will see, if you have used the medium before, if you haven't, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A, and then there's a chat. The chat is for general chatting, but the Q&A is when you want to ask questions of or to the presenters. Now, there are three presenters, but there may be an aligned question that may not be directly related to what they are presenting, but it is still important in your view, because remember, all our schools are a little different. Then at the end of the second presentation, which will be by Galen, we will then have a poll that will go up, and you will be asked to, it's a very short little poll, it'll give you 5 or 6 questions, and you will be asked a few questions. Please fill it in, because it'll give us an indication and yourself an indication of what people are planning to do and how they are planning to run things. I sincerely hope that at the end of this particular session, everybody will walk away knowing a bit more or being a little more calmer about how well they are doing. Alternatively, saying to themselves, well, I really thought that I was at sea. Now I see we are all swimming in the sea. So that makes me happy too. So whichever is your comfort zone, I hope that you reach that comfort zone. So let me first start by introducing Landeka Diamond to you. Miss Landeka Diamond is a principal of Westlake Primary School in Cape Town in the Western Cape. Among other things, she is also the national winner for the National Teaching Awards category, Excellence in Primary School Leadership. She's also been a provincial nominee for the Commonwealth Education Awards in 2021, for 2021. She serves as the National Deputy President of the Education Management Association of South Africa, and she's well educated, holding a master's degree from UCT, as well as various other degrees. And of course, she has a little phrase which she uses as her personal motto. If I can't change the direction of the wind, I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination, she says. We'll give Landeka an opportunity in a minute, but I'm also going to introduce at the same time Galen Bowles to you. Galen is our current PCO of Gauteng. Galen has been there since January 2019. Prior to this, she was based in a primary school for 29 years, and 10 of which were as principal. She also represents NAPTOSA on SACE, and of course on the calendar committee. Don't throw any stones at her. We weren't consulted on the last calendar. And of course on TDCM. Galen has a vast array of experience, but what she has done for us today was to consult a number of schools around her, schools that she's worked with previously and others that she hasn't. And she has put together a presentation from a number of schools to give a general idea of what is going on. She's also quite an expert in the foundation phase classroom. Finally, I want to introduce to you Dr. Marion Joseph. Marion is our Professional Development Officer in the Gauteng office since 2003 and has a background in English home language and first additional language in the primary and high schools. But she's also lectured in English methodology at the Johannesburg College of Education. And then currently she is also busy with the B.Ed students, first, second and fourth year students at Wits University for the past 5 years. And of course, she has done research on assessment and on assessment reform, to be specific, for her master's degree. But Marion is one of those stalwarts who keeps us in the straight and narrow when it comes to curricular matters in both the secondary and the primary school. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Landeka, who's going to talk to us about timetabling and how she is dealing with timetabling and the things around timetabling. Over to you, Landeka.
Good afternoon, my colleagues, my NAPTOSA colleagues from the various schools. I'm glad to be part of you this afternoon. I am quickly going to share what is it that we are doing at Westlake Primary School in order to cope with the demands of COVID-19. Basically, what is happening at this stage on site, we have our grade 7 learners who started on the 1st of June, as we all know. And we had to see that we are ready when the children arrive on site. I want to mention that there are a couple of things that inform what we are doing as a school. Obviously, the first thing that informs us is the vision of the school. Even though we find ourselves in this situation, we don't want to lose sight of what is it that Westlake Primary School aims to achieve. And of course, the Gazette 43381 and the CAPS and the documents and the ATPs, we're taking all that into cognizance. So then we had to look at the option that we're going to take as a school, which is the second option if you're looking at the Gazette of alternative days. Westlake Primary School is going to follow a 5-day cycle over a 10-day period. What made us to take this decision? We considered the number of children that we have as a school, the number of rooms, venues available around the school, and of course the number of educators that will be available to teach in those rooms. Then the grade 7s are following the required time, which is the 27.5 minutes, 27 hours, 30 minutes. So this arrangement is going to stay because they are not going to be rotating. They will be on site as it is required by them to do so. Then on the 6th of July, we are expecting our grade 6s who will be on site joining the grade 7s in the phase. And between the 6th of July and the 3rd of August, the grade 6 learners will also follow a full timetable of 27 hours, 30 minutes, same as the grade 7s, until the grade 4s and grade 5s arrive on the 3rd of July. Then I'm going to pause with the InterCENT phase and move over to the foundation phase. We're expecting our grade 1s to grade 3 to come in on the 6th of July. And I think this is bringing a lot of anxiety to many schools because the entire foundation phase is going to come at the same time. So what have we done to make sure that this becomes a smooth process? Our foundation phase classes have been divided into 2, which means each class has been split into 2 halves, and the children are going to be color-coded. We're going to have the red group, and we're going to have the blue group. For instance, the grade 1N class will be 1 in red and 1 in blue. And the grade 1s and 2s, if you know, it's 23 hours per week that they are expected to cover. So that will be covered over a period of 2 weeks. But in any given week, we want to make sure that we do cover the 23 hours. That means there will be 11 hours on site and 11 hours off site. So the teachers are going to divide the times according to this. English home language is going to be 3.5 hours. Maths is going to be 3.5 hours as well. English is 4 hours. Afrikaans is 2 hours, and life skills is going to be 3 hours. This is the time that they are going to spend at school. So what is going to happen is the red group is going to be at school Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then the blue group will be at school on Thursdays and on Fridays. And then the following week, we're going to swap. The red group will be at school for 3 days, and the other group will be at school for 2 days, respectively. Now, the main concern becomes the days that the children are not coming to school. What is going to happen to cover the 50% of the time? We are going to work closely with our parents, especially the foundation phase parents, because these children are not independent in order to cope with this work on their own. So what we have done is we are putting up a schedule and a clear, concise work plan that the parents can follow, and we're going to work with the message books in order to indicate and communicate to and from the school. For instance, if I can quickly take you through what the grade 1s and 2s will be doing. For English, they will be expected to cover 4 hours in a week off site. How are they going to spend the 4 hours? Reading is going to be 15 minutes per day. Phonics is 15 minutes. Language usage is 15 minutes 4 times a week. And then creative writing is going to be 15 minutes 4 times a week as well. When it comes to mathematics, which is 3 hours, 30 minutes per week off-site, they're going to count at home for 15 minutes every day. Mental maths is 10 minutes a day. And then the other 20 minutes is going to be used for consolidation of concepts. Obviously, that would have been taught at school the previous day. Afrikaans is our first additional language. They will be expected to do 1 hour per week. And it will be divided to 15 minutes phonics, 15 minutes reading, and life skills will be 2.5 hours. And of course, consolidation for 20 minutes. The grade 3s are going to follow a similar pattern. It's just that they have more time for life skills in Afrikaans. Then I'm going to the InterCENT phase. On the 3rd of August, when all the grades are back on site, we are going to follow a similar pattern in terms of color coding the children. And we're going to follow the timetable on site for the 27.5 hours. Then the periods are as follows. Monday to Friday, we have 12 periods for 6 hours. Tuesday, 12 periods for 6 hours up to Wednesday. Our Thursdays have 10 periods, which is 5 hours, 30 minutes, and 8 periods on a Friday for 4 hours. We have a 30-minute period system. So this is going to be an on-site arrangement. Then the other times that the children are at home, they will be used for consolidation. We're going to use the blue books and also to wrap up the work that has not been completed in class. Educators are going to ensure that the work that is done off-site does not necessarily require a teacher. For instance, some of the classworks will now be regarded as homework, and all new concepts will be taught during the 50% that the children are on site. Basically, we are not reducing the number of hours that the children are going to receive. the curriculum. Just that we are dividing when are they going to receive at school and what are they going to receive off-site. And we will follow up and engage with parents to ensure that the time that is used at home is used and the children are benefiting from that. I also want to touch on what is it that we have done to actually make our lives a little bit easier. Obviously, we want the children to be 1.5 meters apart. So besides dividing classrooms into 2 halves to ensure that there is physical distancing, we have also done that in order for the screening purposes. We've got various screening stations, and these screening stations are also color coded. So if I'm from the red class, at any given time, there will be a class list which indicates which children should be at school on that particular day. So when the children arrive, we've tried the system with our grade 7s and it's working perfectly. The first day it was a little bit difficult because the children did not know which colors they belong to. But when it came to day 2, a child knew that I'm in the red group, I need to go to the red station. And at the station, there are 2 teachers stationed. One is taking the temperature and the other one is asking the 5 questions that we need to ask to screen the children. Then we've got 2 educators who are floating in order to receive those children who would possibly be identified as not classroom ready. That would obviously be your children who've got flu symptoms, who are not feeling okay. And then we've got a structured system of getting those children back home to make sure that they do not enter the classroom if they are not feeling well. So this coding system is making things move rather smoothly because the child knows which station to go to. And also we have marked the school property for social distancing. And when the bell rings, the child knows which dots do I occupy as a blue child and as a red child. And this is making transition and walking in between the school for entering and for leaving the premises and for intervals much easier. We've also staggered the stations that they are going to play during interval. So there is a station for red and blue and yellow children, and that minimizes the traffic. And when it comes to when the full complement of the 50% of the school is back, we are going to follow a similar pattern. And the children are going to be anxious, and this is going to assist them so that they can zone themselves and know how do they operate. What we've also done to reduce the risk, we have limited the space to 2 children sharing a particular desk. This is going to assist us, so when it comes to tracing, if a child has COVID, for instance, then we would know which 2 children are sharing that space. And that will be much easier for us to do in terms of tracing, to know exactly which children are going to be affected if the children are fixed at particular stations. Then there's an issue of a question of assessment. How do we assess our children if they are coming to school at different times? So there is no assessment for term 2. There's no June examination. All informal assessments will be done according to the requirements. Then when it comes to term 3 and 4, and we have to do formal exams, we will then have a system where we have a full grade complement coming to write exams on that particular day. For instance, if the grade 4s will come in the morning between 8:30 and 10:30, then they will write their exam. Then between 10:30 and 11:30, we will disinfect the school. And then at about 12 o'clock until 2:30, we can then have a second grade coming in to write in the afternoon session to ensure that there is disinfection of the surfaces and the classrooms before the next lot comes to the school. I think I have covered what we also did as a school. We have been very, very proactive in terms of knowing that some people might have to be absent due to isolation or having to come into contact. Then we are busy with the community. Fortunately, we are a community school. We are busy screening individuals that are going to stand in should there be a need and we need more people to stand in. And what we are going to do is we are going to try the option and do the option of Google Classrooms so that the other person is supervising the class while the class is receiving education next door using Google Classrooms. If a school is not equipped to use Google Classrooms, if you are a rural school or a school that doesn't have that, a teacher can then arrange to give work to those children and go in to monitor, and then the person can supervise the children to make sure that they are receiving education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Landeka. Ladies and gentlemen, that was our first presentation. And as you can see, Landeka comes from an array of experience, and they've got a lot that is done. But we will reserve our some of the questions we have for a little later. Now we are going to ask Galen if she will step to the plate and do her presentation. Galen has a PowerPoint presentation which will be screened now. So if you put your screens on full view or full screen, then you will even see it better. Thank you, Galen. Over to you.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Galen Bowles, and as Mr. Manuel indicated, I got together with in the virtual media with a whole lot of school principals to ask them to assist me in what was the picture going to look like when we've been asked to return to school on the 6th of July. And you will immediately see that there is no ways when you are bringing back grade R3, grade R, grade 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7 in your school that you can actually reach a maximum capacity of 50% of your children at school. That pie chart shows you immediately that you're hitting towards 75% of your school coming back. In the next slide, which Rochelle will move to, you will see that I went to a typical school, and really with a ratio of 1 to 40, where we know that that is the ideal, but it is not the ideal, and many schools have more than 1 to 40 children. So if you've got 4 classes per grade, and into this factor I did make the grade R slightly smaller, you would see that you would have close to 900 children arriving at school if you had 4. If you've got 3 classes per grade, you'd be looking close to 700 children, and even 2 classes per grade, suddenly your primary school would have over 400 children. So if we can move to our next slide, I think the initial thing that has made primary schools very anxious is that how are we going to cope with the screening of all these learners on the first day? Having done it with the grade 7s, many of you would have noticed that initially it did not move very quickly, and it did take time. So one of the things that many of the principals that I spoke to are considering is that they will have staggered arrival times for learners, so that we're not, especially on the first day or so, we're not bringing everyone in all together. And what then happens if I have got my grade, some of my grade 6s, grade 6s, grade 2s, grade 3s arriving, and they're a family? You could then have a policy within your school, and you would need to communicate this to your parents, that the younger children would obviously go with the eldest child first because of different arrival times. One of the schools, through using Google Forms, was even going to try and fast track the system of having an online screening tool that parents could complete each morning, because if you use Google Forms, you can it can then link back to Excel, and this would assist, because we all know that little children do not always answer honestly. And in speaking to some of the principals, they've found that many of the children returning in grade 7 do not always want to be honest about how they're feeling because they're worried they might have contracted the virus. So there's a lot of anxiety. Now, grade 7, if you go to the, is expected to come every day. Sorry, but perhaps one of the suggestions that could be made is, especially for the return on the 6th, maybe we should look at keeping grade 7s at home that day so that there's more staff available, because as you heard in Landeka's presentation, it does take time and children need to know the routine. You cannot bring back the amount of children unless you have more than one entrance. And I know in Gauteng province, schools were told you can only use one entrance, but this is not really going to be possible. And so many grades would need to report to different entrances within the school. And of course, that would depend on your context. Also, it would depend on, do you have the equipment? Because there's not been an equal distribution of PPEs and particularly scanners within the different provinces. You can have KZN that have provided scanners per grade, and then you'll have Gauteng with 2 scanners and Limpopo with 1 scanner. So this is something the school will need to think about. Now, it's not going to be physically possible to bring back all your children on the 6th of July, and learners will need to be divided into, as Landeka said, they've got a group A and a group B, a red group, a blue group, a green group. And I must say, in my analysis of speaking to everyone, most of the schools have said they've taken the initial class list and they've divided it into 2. This seems to be the most popular. There is also one other school that said, no, they were going to bring back 2 classes and divide the learners amongst the teachers. But that is a less popular way of dealing with it. So if we can go to the next slide. Definitely daily rotation has come back as the most popular method, and it's definitely going over 10 days. And in analysis, I would say it would need to go over 10 days because most schools are trying to keep to a notional time, and this is how it works. So one of the schools had a group A, and the children would come Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday group A, Tuesday group B, Wednesday group A, Thursday group B, and then Friday group A. The pattern would repeat the following week, but you will note in the slide that the Friday group suddenly changes. Now, what are the advantages of this is that the school would be able to comply with physical distancing. There's no extra teaching venues that would be required. No extra staff would be required. And your screening time would be reduced because you are dealing with a smaller group of children. If we can move on. Next slide. The next slide also shows a clustered days of rotation. It also goes over 10 days, and every 5 days there's a rotation. So only 50% of the class would attend the school on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And the other 50% would attend Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it initially started off with just for 3 days, and then the next group went to 5 days. And this school then left the children coming back in those 5-day cycles. And so that all learners will have had 5 out of 10 days at school. They then also color-coded the children, so the children would know which group would be at school at which time. This was favored because it allowed for continuity of teaching, particularly with foundation phase, not having to chop and change all the time. There was also less frequency of change of learners, and this would allow for adequate sanitizing of points. There would be no changes to the timetable. It would, except where there were teachers off with comorbidities. Learners who were at home would continue to receive online work, and many schools are using platforms like D6 communicators or even packing packs for parents to take so that the children can work at home. There would not be the need for additional classrooms, and school times would remain unchanged. Also, this would allow for us, if a school had a supervision timetable, that this could also be implemented. And specialist teachers would be able to continue to teach their respective subjects and within their phases. If we move to the next slide, one school went for a weekly rotation. So they would break up their classes into 1 or 2 groups and then allowed the children to come back in week 1 and group 2 the following week. And they felt that this allowed for social distancing, and you only had 50% of your school back, and there was continuity of teaching. Right, and one of the things to consider and in the planning, so as much as it is trying to work out who's coming back where, when and how you would move your timetable in, is that schools do need to consider what happens to the children after they've been screened. These are little children, they're not used to social distancing, and so yes, it's going to be a change of routine, so a lot of marking has to happen outside the classroom. Now, the average size of a classroom, you would know that you can't line up 20 learners along even the outside door of a classroom. So you've got to be creative. And I know many schools, and particularly with the grade 7s returning, have tried to ensure that the educators are in the classroom to receive the children. But this might not be all possible when we're having to do all the screening. Specialist educators are used to, and we're used to children changing classes, but specialist educators are rather changing classes and the children are remaining in the class. This assists with the sanitization and that, but it does become quite difficult when you have to work with your different subjects and painting and, you know, all the things that the children love doing at school. It does become quite challenging. Schools would have to look at how do they work out their break duties, also having half back in the first 10 minutes within the classroom. They would eat their lunch and others outside, and then moving children back in, because everybody needs the fresh air. Everyone needs to stretch their legs. The monitoring of bathrooms, more done easier when it's during the school day, but perhaps at breaks, not locking the bathroom so that you can monitor who's going in and out, or appointing people to stand there. There's also been a lot of discussion, and we know we've been asked to wash masks regularly. What do we do about school uniforms? How do we accommodate that? So some of the schools are suggesting there will be different days that you will wear different uniforms to allow for children's uniforms to be washed. It's all well and good too to have all the children moving in, but how are we going to dismiss the learners? Do we just allow that this is going home time and everybody runs to the gate, and then all the hard work where you've worked hard with social distancing, this would need to be fixed. Also, preparation for home learning. And I know I've had many educators saying, but you know, Galen, I'm not teaching grade 7. What am I doing at school? Well, this is the time to be getting ready for doing all the home learning. Also, one of the things when doing your timetable, perhaps you want to consider longer periods to also limit movement, so that more work can be covered, and if educators are having to move, that they're not having to move, because most schools run on about a 35-minute period. And then I think one of the biggest things, and I know Marion will talk to it later, is we really have got to look at what really is essential, and we're going to have to teach the core curriculum and the core skills, and there is going to have to definitely be a lot of trimming and careful thought into why am I teaching this? I mustn't just be teaching it because it needs to be assessed. I need to see that our children are ready to carry on. And that's why I know part of NAPTOSA's discussion has been, why the grade 7s? We should all really be worried about our grade 1 children who are missing out on so much when it comes to all the core of teaching. If we can just move on. Now, many of the children and the teachers, there's a lot of anxiety in returning to the classroom. And one of the, I would like to thank these ideas that I received from a grade 1 teacher who said to me, the biggest thing she sees in returning back is the need to reduce the anxiety and to create a calmness in the classroom. And one of the things, wearing our masks, you will see that masks hide our facial expressions. And many of us teachers, we don't only speak with our voices, we really use our faces to express our feelings, to express our teaching content and that. And so we've got to go with the notion that all superheroes wear masks. You've yet to see superheroes that don't wear masks. I know they cover the eyes more, but we superheroes that cover our noses and our mouths. So these are some of the ideas that she said would actually maybe bring calmness into the classroom. So have certain jingles that children like to interact with, so that there is communication with the teacher. There should be greeting songs, sign language, action songs, rhymes, creating feeling prompts for the children, because we do know our little ones always love to run and hug you and that. And they even do this when they're feeling sad and that. So create emoji lollipops for the children. Very important to see how children are feeling, because they've really come from an anxious situation and back to school, and there's lots happening all the time. And encourage that children place their things on their desks, teaching them to keep their desks nice and tidy, and that they're able to use their emojis and lollipops during the day. Our next slide. Important for teachers, start thinking about what are your hand signals going to be, what are your gestures going to be, how are you going to show that you can communicate, you know, thumbs up and your washing of hands, and then start thinking of other things like a hula hug. Instead, we can't hug our children, but the educator can certainly put a hula hoop around them and then sanitize it and create fun things, bring the fun back into the classroom. Obviously, there needs to be firm boundaries and predictable expectations. And I know many, when I was looking at the questions that people were asking, they were saying, how are we going to get this right with little children? But once we have the boundaries that are firm, I think change will happen, and children will become familiar and be able to cope with things. Also, very important, encouraging a sense of ownership, seeing that children tidy up, pack their things away, and with classrooms likely to be sanitized and wiped off. Really, if you sprayed the sprays, you will know that it does affect the books and it affects the papers. So perhaps having beer trays that are painted, that you could put that children are responsible for packing their things away, and Ziploc bags. And then of course there's always music and that also calms children while they're working. So these are just some of the suggestions that people made. I know I haven't dealt exactly with timetable, but perhaps with some of the things that we are anxious about when we're returning to school. I do note in some of the questions, people are asking, what about aftercare facilities? Yes, schools can apply to have their aftercare facilities opened, and this is allowed, and it will need that you get the permission to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. Ladies and gentlemen, that has given you a brief overview. Let's just look at some of the things that have been said. You'd notice that we didn't speak about platooning, primarily because there are very few people that seem to think that this is a good option. And quite frankly, neither do I. Simply because of the impact it has on teachers. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that our teachers out there, far from only having to execute the job of the day teaching, they come from home with their own stresses and they have their own fears. The fears of being back at school are enormous. There are people that are in a daily panic every day. Don't talk about folk who have little ones at home, who have elderly parents and family members at home, or are pregnant. There are 7,000 pregnant people as we speak at the moment in our classes. And all that just leads to the stress. So we've got to find ways of reducing the stress. But let me go to Therona, who is going to fire some of the questions at our participants that you have asked on the Q&A that haven't been answered. And then we'll go to David, who will field some of the questions that had been sent in that haven't been covered yet. And let's see how far we can get with that. Therona, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Basil. I have a question from Megan Ramsey. There's actually two questions regarding aftercare, or the opening of aftercare that will have to cater for learners who will be at school after school hours. The second question is from Irene Farland, who says she wants Landeka's presentation to be forwarded to her, and I'm sure that is possible. We have a question. The third question is, are there any protocols in place with regard to marking of learners' daily exercise books? Dave Lombard asks, from who do you apply to open aftercare facilities? The next question comes from F. Tagari. The major problem that we are experiencing at the moment is that caregivers or transport drivers do not pick the children up on time. Any advice on how to deal with this? This is when the social distancing is broken amongst peers, if not monitored. I want to do one more question, or maybe let's just do two more. T. Madikazela says the Gazette states that grades are to 3 and 6, but the presentation in our district says 2, 3, and 6 are the only ones returning. And let me do one more. VG Naidu asks, staggered times do not work in an environment when the majority of the learners travel with taxi and bus. So let's leave it at that. You have, Basil, answered other questions on the group, another question on the group as well. So that's a wrap from the questions regarding the Q&A that's been posted during the presentation.
Okay, shall we go to Lundy to field some of those, and then Galen to field some of those? Lundy, see what you can do with what you have there that have been asked.
Okay, the issue of protocol when it comes to marking, I don't think there is a strict protocol when it comes to that. It all depends what assessment needs to be done. For instance, informal assessment, pre-COVID, we had peer assessment and we had educators marking. As long as teachers ensure that there's marking done and there is feedback that is given to the learners, I think that is key. And then if you have to do any marking during the on-site time, obviously the assessment policy of the school will now have to filter in amendments in terms of you do not touch a child's book without sanitizing your hands before you touch that book, etc. And then when the books come from home as well, that you might have to sanitize often to make sure that you are keeping the hygiene standards when you touch those books. But the most important thing is the learner needs to get some form of feedback from whatever work that they have done.
Thanks, Lundy. Galen, do you want to come in with some of the others? I've got some that I will respond to, but if you can come in.
The aftercare, you apply to your provincial education department, and you will find it in the in the government gazette on the return to schools. It's definitely grade R1, 2, 3, and 6 that have to return on the 6th. So it's interesting to hear that a specific province or district have had different information. With regards to staggered times, yes, it would be very difficult. And this is something schools, some of the schools have thought about, especially on the initial first day or so. And yes, to the one about transport, there is no big answer that one can really give, because the transport issue is huge. Many schools share transport. So when you have schools that are in close proximity, we could be having a number of children coming in different transports. But I do know that there are strict protocols when it comes to transport that is being provided by the Department of Education, what we term as scholar transport, where, and if I can use in Gauteng, there is supposed to be someone on the transport that does screen the children, that records all the information. And I know in the Gauteng province, definitely training has happened with scholar transport. I know things always look good on paper, but in reality, to make things work, it's not always that easy.
Thank you, Galen. David, just before you come in, can I just add one or two responses? I'm careful with the time, because by 3 o'clock we start with Marion. Ladies and gentlemen, remember that there's a document called the Guidelines, and listen to the word guidelines, for the development of school timetables. Now, if you don't have that document, it will be on our website. It is there already, I think, and you can download it from there. It's very useful. It speaks to the different models, but it also goes to what is critical. And I'm quoting now from it, and it says, schools must keep the core subjects, such as mathematics, home language, English first, and first additional language in the timetable daily. Those are the core subjects. So when all else fails, because some of these things are going to be difficult and you're not going to make everything work, but those things have to work. I am of the view, and my background is in the primary school, 18 years as a principal of a primary school, and I can tell you that if I had to do it now, those are the only things I'd really concentrate on, because those are the things that matter. But of course, there's an assessment regime that we still need to follow. Now, the application for aftercare, Galen has adequately covered that. I just want to stress about the grades returning. There was the original Gazette, and then there was a second Gazette that was published. The second Gazette is the amended Gazette, and it says grade R, 1, 2, and 3, and 6 will join the grade 7s. Now, about those applications, the Minister has made it quite clear that the only requirement for the application is that you have already been doing aftercare. If you are starting an aftercare now, you're not going to get permission, but it's aftercare that has been there, and that is the only requirement that has to be done. David, over to you. David, you with us? Okay, we seem to have a little tick. Oh, there we can hear you now, David. Yes.
It was unmuted, but I don't know what happened there. Right. Lots of questions, but I've narrowed them down to 3 for each lady. I'm not sure if we're going to get them all answered in 10 minutes, but I'm going to move to Galen first. Galen, you've touched on this during your presentation. It comes from KZN, anonymously, obviously, these questions beforehand. Is there value in grade 7 pupils reporting every day, when in fact grade 1s have most likely lost the most important input for their futures? That's the first question.
Being a foundation phase teacher at heart, and knowing how important and how critical the foundation phase, and particularly your grade 1 year, and I really do feel sorry for our children and our educators, because they've missed out on such critical time now. And if I had my way of doing things, I would really rather encourage more for our grade 1s to be at school than our grade 7s. Our grade 7s have had 7 years of schooling. They've had some of the core skills that they need. And I know moving on to the next phase of high school, and that's perhaps why they brought the grade 7s back, I really do feel for our grade 1 children who need the routine, who need the continuity. And if I can ask that when we do have our grade 1s coming back, please focus on the core. Let's leave out all the peripherals, and let's get our children reading, because this is a whole generation. Are we going to hear in 12 years' time that COVID affected our matric results? And so if I had my way, and if we were leading things, I would really have rather encouraged that our grade 1 children return.
So given, and there's got to be a leading question here, given the professional activist that you are, would you possibly recommend that some schools apply to have the grade 1s every day and say to the grade 7s who can do distance learning better to rather go for that? Or is that a no-no?
Well, within the Gazette, there is and the amended Gazette, you will see there is, schools can apply to have their grades return in different orders. And it comes up in the Gazette. So, you know, if you feel so strong about it, why not take that chance and really try and apply? Because our grade 1 children are of great concern to me.
Second question related to something you mentioned as well, Galen, and just some thoughts. This question comes from the Northwest Province. Platooning has not come through as a strong option for primary schools. Any thoughts on why not?
Well, platooning is when you have a group of children in the morning and then a group of children in the afternoon. Now, we've heard of scholar transports. We've heard that children have to, little children are don't just always walk to school. Yes, in some communities they do, but platooning, in fact, for me, would endanger a child's life, because how do you have little children at school going on till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it's winter, our country, it gets dark. So I don't think platooning is a favored option. I do know one of our provinces and one of the districts, particularly within that province, are instructing schools that they must use a platooning model. But to me, it's not a safe model for our children, and particularly when we are dealing with little children and their lives.
And then the last question, Galen, it's touched on in many of the questions, and it's about class size. It comes from Gauteng. The GDE has indicated that there should be no more than a ratio of 1 to 20. The ideal class size under normal circumstances is 1 to 40. Reality is that many classes are larger than 40 learners, and that timetabling a class into 3 groups is not an option. What are your thoughts on this?
I really feel that we need to try and encourage the social distancing within the classes. And perhaps it's going to have to take schools looking at this venue that I have here and this size class is not going to work. We are going to have times where there are not going to be 20 children in a class. Because to have children coming in on a 3-day cycle of 3 different groups is not going to give the continuity that your primary school child needs. So it might mean that what was perhaps a grade 7 classroom might need to be turned into a foundation phase classroom, so that we can have more children coming to school than sticking to the 1 to 20. I think the important factor is having the social distancing within the classroom. So schools might have to re-look at their facilities and say, this might work better for this group of children, because we really want, the important thing within primary school children is there needs to be routine and there needs to be continuity, and they don't cope well with disruption.
Thanks very much, Galen. I want to wrap up with Landy. If you can put Landy on screen. Landy, there's some questions here for you. The first one comes from the Western Cape. Will you be having intermediate teachers teach foundation phase and vice versa?
Okay, definitely, Dave. I didn't touch on that on my presentation. What we did when our grade 7s returned, we had a month of time at school, and the foundation phase teachers were not even sure at the time when will their children be returning, because there was a lot of anxiety. And what we did as a school, we decided that we are in this together. And then we looked at educator strengths and content knowledge, and we shared the grade 7 load amongst all the educators at the school in order to make sure that the grade 7s are getting tuition, and we're not having a situation where the intercent teachers are sweating teaching the grade 7s and the foundation phase teachers are sitting anxiously, drinking coffee around the school, not sure what to do. So we are sharing the load. Likewise, when the foundation phase returns, then we would have the most children except the 4s and the 5s. So definitely looking at the skills, we do that because a teacher can teach as long as there's a lesson plan, content, and willingness.
Thanks very much, Landy. I'm conscious of the time. Does your timetable accommodate staggered break times? And if so, how?
At this stage, we are not doing it because we only have the grade 7s. But when we have the full complement of the learners on site, we're going to have different intervals for foundation phase and intercent phase and stagger the times. In actual fact, in our situation, is not something that is new because we have always differentiated times between the foundation phase and the intercent phase. We've never had them at the same time for various reasons, like to prevent bullying and what have you, and to make the children feel comfortable. So definitely we will have different break times for foundation phase, and the space on the ground, like I said, we've color coded them. We'll have the red children at a different section and the blue children at a different section to ensure that the load is manageable to manage physical distancing and to make sure that they are not all overcrowded in the same space.
Thanks, Landy. The last question, how will assessments be done if children are not at school? So how are you going to cover your SBA?
Okay, the formal assessment when it comes to exams, we will not then follow the situation of having blue and green children on site and at different times. What we will then do, we will have the entire grade. For instance, if the grade 4s are writing between 8 and 10:30, then we will have 2 different grades writing on a given day. They will take the morning session, then we will use an hour to disinfect, then we will have another grade coming in the afternoon from 12 to 2:30 to write a particular exam. So when it comes to assessment week, we are going to follow a completely different approach where we are not using colors, but rather the entire grade to come on site, because we can't have a situation where the red children write today and then the blue children write tomorrow. Then the question paper will be floating all over, and we can't burden the teachers asking them to set 2 different kinds of assessment. So we will then switch the arrangement and communicate it clearly with the parents to make sure that we have a full grade complement on site at any given time, taking into account totals as well.
Thanks, Basil.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Landeka, and thank you, Galen. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we move to Marion, just as a means of wrapping up, we may still have time at the end for a few more questions, David. Communication is important, but communication is also the devil, because some schools are able to communicate now and say, we are going to have the grade R's, 1s, 2s, and 3s coming on this day and not the others. Remember, you are entitled to do that. Your context allows you to do certain things. However, if you can't communicate with the parents, then you're going to have everybody come. So maybe you've got to work with those people who are there. The grade 7s are there. And if in fact you are not going to manage everybody back, because already you're going to be at 75%, maybe the wisdom that Galen mentioned about keeping the grade 7s home for those first 1 or 2 days whilst you are sorting out the others is good advice. I want to mention about the 40. We speak very glibly about the average class size being 40. There are a number of schools in Gauteng where the average class size is bigger than 55. And that really is a problem. And I don't even want to talk about some of the other provinces where it is even worse. We have up to 80 in northern KwaZulu-Land and so on. So this is not going to be easy sailing. If you are in a school that has under 50 children per class, fall on your knees and thank God because you've been blessed. But it is not the same blessing in every part of the country. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that there are guidelines given. But one of the most important guideline in the guidelines is that they are context bound. So your context will determine the choice of things you make. And not everything can be scripted, and not everything can be a regulation, and not everything indeed do we want as a regulation. There are no primary schools that need to extend the day. And that is why we have been opposed to the platooning system, which in fact gets to an extension of the day. The bottom line is, what is it that we must do to ensure that COVID has worked for us? Teach every child to read, teach every child to do maths and master the language. And then every child will thank us because COVID has improved the life chances of the children in the next phase. Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask Marion to come and talk to us now and share with us a number of things. But before Marion comes up, I'm going to give you exactly a minute so that you can look at the poll and you can start punching in details. And by that time, Richard in the background, who's a great guy, who has done a lot of background work, and we're not seeing him, so let me thank him for that now. Marion will then be ready. At the same time, let me also welcome the NAPTOSA president, Stan Tantala. He's within the group because he just sent me a message to say hi there. And of course, there are many, many, many other people that are here. We are sitting with a large group of people, and thank you very much for being here. Marion, Richard, over to you all. Richard?
I'm apparently still muted by the host.
Okay, you're on.
Now I'm unmuted. Right. Can we go to the slides? All right. You'll recall that the title for this webinar is the NAPTOSA National Timetable and Readiness Webinar, preparing schools for the next phase of the staggered return of classes and the impact of assessment plans on teaching. So I am going to be focusing on assessment plans, but I need to forewarn you that many of the plans that have been made and the guideline documents that have been issued have not been done in collaboration with one another, and you'll find there isn't necessarily an alignment between these documents. And from the questions I've seen that came in, I think there's a lot of confusion and concern about the implementation of these various documents. So can we go to the next slide, please? Where I'm going to talk a little bit about the school recovery plan. This is a document you can access on the Department of Basic Education's website. A draft of this document was first put out there, and I know that even after the meeting we had with the DBE in the middle of April, and we were told the document was confidential, within 24 hours I heard that it had actually been leaked. That draft school recovery plan has been revised in terms of the new return to school dates, because when the first document was put out, they anticipated a return to school on the 6th of May. And so the new document was put out at the beginning of June. And as I said, it's not a bad idea to access it on the DBE website and read it. One of the stated key strategies that informs the school recovery plan is time management. And I'm quoting from the document. It says, time is of the essence in a school recovery plan, and hence time must be strictly managed at school level so that the focus is on maximizing teaching time and limiting the time for tests and examinations. And I certainly applaud that sentiment. Whether in fact that is what will actually happen, time will tell. And again, I noted from questions that people are concerned about about having enough time to complete the trimmed and reorganized curriculum ATPs and the accompanying assessment requirements. So there has been a review of these documents, and one of the stipulations is that all Term 1 SBA requirements must have been completed. So hopefully everyone has done so. Then, can we go to the next slide, please? Upon return to school, and I've just listed the dates there, grade 7 start on the 8th of June, grades 1, 2, 3, and grade R, and grade 6 will be going back in just over a week's time. And then grades 4, 5, 8, and 9 will only go back on the 3rd of August. When they do go back, the recovery document says that there should be a class test administered in order for teachers to ascertain the areas of work that were covered in Term 1 that need to be revised. And I think this is sensible, because we know that the gap between schools reopening and learners coming back has been significant. Some have been able to access continued learning, many have not. And so this statement recognizes that there are differences in contexts. And my question is, will schools be allowed to take up with the learners where they are at? Because if you look at the revised, the trimmed ATPs, they don't acknowledge the need, or many of them don't acknowledge the need for time for revision, time for revisiting perhaps some of the things that children may have forgotten. Furthermore, you're not required to do any June exams. Those have been scrapped for everybody. And then teachers are encouraged to avoid tests and exams except for the final exams. And the other stipulation is that there will be only one formal summative assessment task per term. And for someone like myself that has been very closely involved with assessment issues in my province, it's always very debatable as to whether one actually means one. So I watch this with interest, and the implementation of this one formal summative assessment. Will it remain one, or will one mean 3, 4, maybe 5? Languages have been considered an exception because they advocate that one oral assessment per term be retained. Now, the language group are interesting because if you look at the ATP for grade 7 for term 2, you will see that they've included 3 formal assessment tasks. And one of those is an SBA that is required to last 2.5 hours. And it looks very much like the June exam. So, to my mind, this is certainly a matter for concern. And then last week, there was a meeting of the National Examinations and Assessment Committee. And they tabled a draft circular. And I need to keep emphasizing that it is a draft circular. It is not official yet. And this circular addresses assessment, particularly school-based assessment, although it also talks about examinations in the GET band. And so it talks about the administration of SBA and then the quality assurance of SBA. And as I said, in the GET band. So this is your grade R to grade 9. So it advocates that only key points in learning processes be summatively assessed and that formative assessment be emphasized. Now here again, I need to make note of a very deep concern that I have. Whenever we have departmental officials talk about formative assessment, we get a very strong sense that there's a very narrow and a very limited understanding of what formative assessment is. And for departmental officials, it seems to be limited to homework, classwork, diagnostic tests, and remediation tasks. And formative assessment is much, much, much more than that. But we'll leave that there for the moment. We have asked that we be allowed to have some say in this document, and one of the things we will address is a much broader interpretation of what formative assessment should be. And then the last bullet, we talk about SBA becoming the main tool for judging learner competencies in the grade. And earlier on, there was a question about protocols for marking learners' work. And certainly, I've spoken to a number of teachers who are aware of the problems, the possible complications that there are with learners' books when they hand in work for marking. And some have said that they've actually indicated that learners are to place their books on a table, and that they in fact leave those books for 3 days before they then mark them. And the 3-day period is because the virus can apparently last for that long on the book. So yes, Landeka, you talked about teachers not transmitting the virus to their learners, but of course there is also the possibility of learners transmitting it to their teachers. And so this is problematic because marking books, providing feedback for learners in as short a space of time as possible is a key aspect of good assessment. And this is not going to be able to happen under these circumstances. Can we go to the next slide, please? This draft circular addresses the issue of end-of-year examinations. And it indicates that schools may only consider an end-of-year exam for mathematics and languages. They say for the rest of subjects, they will write what they've called a standardized test, but we've asked them to rename it because standardized tests suggest something like a matric exam. And they've said that in fact what they mean by standardized tests is actually a school test, a school-based test. So the wording of that we hope will change before this circular goes out to schools. Both, according to the circular, will be written under exam conditions. And so it seems the difference is the exam will be based on the entire year's work, whereas the standardized test or the school-based test will be based on the work done in terms 3 and 4. And considering that your grade 8s and 9s will only go back in August, and they'll have just a couple of days before the second term ends, that seems to be sensible. And then they have changed the weighting of the exams and the standardized tests. These will be reduced. So for grades R to 3, SBA will count for 100%. That will not change. Grades 4 to 9, SBA will count 80% of their final mark, and the end of year exam or school-based test will count for 20%. And they assure us that the revised weighting will be calculated automatically on SASAMs. What is a big concern about this circular? I mean, there are a number of them, but this one for me is the biggest, is that it never acknowledges the importance of seeing a difference between assessment in grades R to 3 and what is developmentally appropriate there, as opposed to assessment in grades 4 to 9. And so this is one of the things that we as unions have asked them to address in this circular. Please make quite clear, foundation-based learners do not write exams. It's continuous assessment in the foundation phase. Assessment in the foundation phase should not be an event like an exam. It should be a continuous day-to-day assessment that takes into account what is developmentally appropriate for these little people. And then the other issue that is highly problematic for me is the reference to moderation. Because again, in the province I'm in, moderation has created an unbelievable amount of extra paperwork for teachers and for departmental heads, for principals, deputy principals. And so these are the kinds of issues we hope to iron out before this document is actually sent out to schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the last presentation, but we still have a bit of time before we get to the end of the day. I want to just give David and Therona an opportunity to ask some of the questions to Marion that have been sent in around assessment. And then there are a number of things that I would like to clarify as well from the Q&A that were there, that have been set, and some really important questions about where some of the information comes from, etc. Things that I think are people desperately need to know. So first, Therona, over to you.
Thank you, Basil. The one question is, will SASAMs be reconfigured to cater for the adjusted assessments and examinations? I'll go to the second one from Joanne.
Can I just answer that one quickly? Yes.
Yes, sure.
I answered it online. Yes, it's been done already.
The other one is from Joanne. Would having 3 groups having a tri-weekly rotation be an option? Our classes can only accommodate 16 learners at a time, and we have 1,171 learners. That may not directly be answered by Marion. It's not an assessment question. We could ask the other panelists. Yes, perfect. All right. And the other question relating to Marion is, how would we assess learners online? Is it possible? From Manoj Phillips, any reasons why platforms cannot be used for tests or exams, platforms such as Google Classroom? Can I leave it there for now regarding the assessment?
Marion?
I imagine that they'd certainly encourage using online assessments if it's possible. It hasn't been discussed extensively, but it has been indicated that it would be something that they would be happy with, comfortable with.
David, any questions for Marion?
Look, I asked Landeka the one question about the timetable. The one question, Marion, I'm not sure if Marion can answer this. Children who are not at school, how will assessments be done for them? Let's say the children with comorbidities. Was that ever discussed at any TDCM meetings that you'd attended? Because Landeka answered the question about how she's going to do the assessment with the children at school. What about those that can't come to school because of comorbidities?
You know, that's something that I think is a significant gap in the conversations that have taken place, as is the assessment in your special schools. And I hope that will be addressed in the webinar next week. But that is certainly a significant gap in this draft circular. And I certainly hope we will get the opportunity to raise it so that something in relation to that will be included.
Thank you. Thanks, Basil.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, just spend another few moments with us whilst I try and just touch on a couple of things. And then, of course, we'll ask Richard to show you the outcome of the poll. First of all, let me just latch onto this issue about children who are not at school. Now, remember, there are two categories. There's the category of kids that have morbidities and as a result can't come to school, or it is advised that they don't. The second category is those where there's a choice. People have decided not to send the children to school. Now, the first category of children is the school must make a plan to assess those children. And in fact, even with homeschooling, children are supposed to, at some stage, latch themselves onto a full-time school to do an assessment so that you can verify the quality of assessment. Now, if the parent has decided to homeschool, it changes the dynamic altogether because they could take assessments at various places. But Marion is right, it hasn't been attended to all that well. And I think even when the minister spoke on national television, she confused the two, where there was a flippant response about, no, if you decide to keep your child at home, that's your problem. But it in fact is not that simple. Then there were questions about where does it say that the grade 7s must come to school continuously? In fact, it's in the guideline, but remember it's a guideline. And we sometimes take guidelines as the law. And sometimes our departmental officials also tend to want to use guidelines as the law. It's a guideline and it's context bound. I actually on the group answered that on page 22 of the guideline document. It says, grade 12 should preferably be at school constantly and grade 7s as well. And hence Galen's input earlier on. Is there really greater wisdom in the grade 7s being there, or should the wisdom be that the grade 1s are far more preferable to be the constant? If I were in a school, I would say to you definitely the grade 1s, because in fact if we don't get the grade 1s to master reading, to catch up what has been lost up to now in terms of, and they are the only ones that have really lost anything because they've lost that formative period that was so important in the second term. If we don't get them to read, we lose a generation because you know that the grade 1 teacher is tuned in to teach reading, more so than the grade 2 and the grade 3 and the grade 4 teacher. Some of those teachers can't even teach reading. They can consolidate it. And that is a big issue there. Then, of course, I just want to mention about Marion's input and around these lesson plans and things, not the lesson plans, the ATPs that have been published. They were conceived in the dark, under a rock, because when they were being worked on, and let me say we were there, NAPTOSA was part of it, the other unions were part of it. There were assumptions being made about when we'd return to school. There were assumptions being made And at that time, the belief still was that, you know, we've locked our schools, and when we get back, we're going to unlock it and life is going to return to normal. We didn't foresee at that early stage when this was being worked on that we were going to go back much later, number one. Number two, that of course we will have these various models that we have to use that are going to render the school day or the time left being 50% of actually what is scripted on the calendar. Because if you do it in rotation, it's only 50%. So none of them are really correct for what you have. And you're going to have to do work on it. I don't believe the National Department has time to reduce it further. You're going to have to do that. But then isn't it the correct thing to do? Because the teacher in the class and the school knows what is important for the next year. So there is going to be a trimming that you will have to do to fit it in. You will never cover everything that is there. If you do, it's a miracle. Or you've pulled a fast one. And I don't believe that you will be doing that. You are more the miracle workers. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's not kill one another, not the teachers or the children. Let's preserve them because they are important to all of us. But you will never get through all that work because it was planned for a much longer period. Finally, there was a question about the PUM and about extension of the school day, etc., etc. And my response was, why in the primary school would you want to extend the school day? For whatever reason. But whatever the reason conceived, let me say, we published a news flash, and I think it's Newsflash 28, where it said, please people, please don't get yourself running down this road where there are decisions about extension of school day without the necessary consultation. Of course it can happen, but the teachers have to be part of that because the PUM prescribes the length of the school day at 7 hours. And yes, it excludes extramurals, etc. But, ladies and gentlemen, that was done for everybody. And that is a very, very important part of legislation so that it is not just abandoned willy-nilly. So if there is this desperate need, then you've got to consult the teachers. The Department of Education asked the ELRC to consider this. Then they withdrew it. So in fact, the Department of Education doesn't believe it is necessary for us to have a temporary amendment. But as teachers go, particularly in the secondary schools, there are thousands of teachers that teach on a Saturday, teach after school, particularly when it comes to the whole matric issue. So, but that is done in consultation. So please, and I beg of you, particularly in management, we want to preserve the relationship between management and teachers. But so the only way to preserve it is by us working together. And I desperately feel sorry for principals at this stage because they are the general dog's bodies that are being abused by the department. And then sometimes it seems as though we are lashing them as well, saying, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that. And I'm saying to you, no, we are trying to preserve the relationship. About the presentations, yes, we are going to try to get the presentations to you. We certainly have a record of them, and so we hope to get there. So in closing, 2 advertorials. First of all, we are having a webinar on Wednesday next week, a special schools one. But please look at it. If you haven't seen it, it's coming to you. It'll hit your screens in the next day or so, but the adverts are out. But you may find it very interesting to see what the discussions are there. It's not only for special schools, but it deals with special school issues. There's another webinar, but this webinar is on Monday, and it is NAPTOSA together with other unions. You know, we commissioned a survey not so long ago to deal with comorbidities. 137,000 teachers responded. Can you believe it? And of course, we did not do the administration of it. The administration was done by the medical council. I forget their full name. And they are going to report back to us. But more importantly, we've asked individuals, really, really important individuals, in the like of Professor Shabir Mahdi, Professor Nandi Siegfried, and Nomfundo Mogapi, She's the Executive Director for the Center for Science Research. And Professor Siegfried is from the College of Medicine. And they are part of the people that are saying, that advised about us going back to school. And so now they're prepared to sit there and answer all the questions you have on this. It's going to be a wonderful webinar. On that note, I want to thank our presenters, starting with Dr. Joseph at the end, very important, going to Galen Bowles. Thank you so much, Galen. That was a wonderful combination. And then, of course, Nandi from the Western Cape. Nandi, you did a fantastic job there. Thank you very, very much. But without David and Therona, and especially Rishal in the background, this wouldn't have been possible. On that note, wait a minute. We're going to now display the outcome of the poll. I thank you, and in exactly 2 minutes, we will close.